HOA president loses it when I deny her access to my farm. I grew up on a farm, and those were some of the best years of my life. There was something about the rhythm of farm life, the early mornings, the long days, and the quiet of the countryside, that I'll always cherish. My parents ran a small, self-sufficient farm, and while it was hard work, it was fulfilling. There was never any rush, no constant noise from the city, and no pressure to conform to anyone's idea of success. It was just us, the land, and the animals, and it felt like the world slowed down a little when I was there. As I grew older, I realized I wanted to continue that life for myself. I didn't want to be stuck in the fast-paced world of urban living. After a few years of trying to figure things out in the city, I decided it was time to buy my own farm. I wanted to get back to that peaceful, grounded life I had known as a kid, and owning a farm of my own felt like the next step. It took a while to find the right place, but eventually, I found a plot of land far from the bustle of any city or suburban neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a few acres, but it was mine. No neighbors too close, no urban sprawl encroaching in the distance, just open fields and a chance to build something new. The first few days on the farm were everything I had hoped for. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. I spent my time working on the barn and just enjoying the peace and quiet. It was the kind of place where you could hear yourself think, where you could feel the seasons change with every step you took on the land. It felt like I had finally found my place again, like I had come home. That was until Linda showed up. It was a quiet morning, just like any other. I was repairing the gate near the front of the property, trying to fix some of the damage from a storm the week before. It was a bit of a mess, but I didn't mind the work. I was about halfway through when I noticed a car pulling up to the farm, not too far from where I was working. It was a bright, shiny vehicle. Definitely not something you'd expect to see out here in the middle of nowhere. At first, I figured it might be someone lost, but then I saw the woman get out of the car, smiling like she knew me. "Hi there," she called out as she walked toward me. "I'm Linda, the president of the HOA for the neighborhood just down the road. I wanted to stop by and introduce myself." I wiped my hands on a rag, trying to mask my irritation. I didn't know what kind of HOA would be so bold as to approach someone who clearly wasn't in their jurisdiction, but I kept my tone polite. "Nice to meet you, Linda. I'm actually not part of the HOA. My farm is outside your neighborhood's jurisdiction." "Oh, I know that," she said, her smile never faltering. "I just thought it would be nice to introduce myself. It's always good to have a friendly relationship with your neighbors, right? We all benefit when the area looks well-maintained and cohesive." I wasn't sure where this was going, but I wasn't about to get roped into anything. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't really plan on joining any neighborhood associations. I've always preferred to keep to myself." Linda didn't seem bothered by my response at all. In fact, she looked almost relieved. "Of course, I totally get it. But it's always nice when the neighborhood looks coordinated. The HOA has some great programs for maintaining properties, and we'd love to help out. If you ever change your mind, just let me know." I could tell this wasn't just a casual visit. It was her way of planting a seed, one that I had no interest in watering. Still, I didn't want to come across as rude, so I just nodded and thanked her for stopping by. As she headed back to her car, she waved one last time, promising to keep in touch. After that, I tried to brush off the encounter. I was here for the land, the peace, and the quiet, nothing more. The last thing I needed was to get tangled up in any sort of community politics or neighborhood obligations. But as I soon learned, that wouldn't be the last time I saw Linda. It was just a few days later when she returned. This time, she had a box in her hands, and there was a warm, almost overly friendly vibe to her visit. "I thought you might like some cookies," she said, holding up the box with a smile that seemed a little too wide. "The neighborhood just had a bake sale, and I figured you'd appreciate the gesture. After all, it's always nice to keep good relations with neighbors, don't you think?" I felt a twinge of frustration. I wasn't sure what her game was, but it was clear she wasn't going to take no for an answer. "Thanks, but I really don't need any cookies," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I've got things covered here." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she replied, still with that bright smile. "But the HOA offers so many wonderful resources. We have programs for land maintenance, lawn care, improvements, things like that. I'm sure you'd benefit from being part of the group. I shook my head. I really prefer to do things on my own. I don't need any help. Linda wasn't dissuaded. Well, you never know. A little coordination can go a long way. If you change your mind, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. With that, she left, again promising to stay in touch. As I watched her drive away, I couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. This wasn't just a neighborly gesture. Linda wasn't trying to welcome me to the area. She was trying to recruit me into something I had no interest in, and I had no intention of getting involved. But it seemed like Linda wasn't going to make it easy for me to just be left alone. The next time I saw Linda, it was in the middle of one of those long, exhausting days when I was fixing up the barn. I had been working non-stop to get things in order. And as usual, I was feeling a little worn out. That's when I saw her car pull up again, almost as if she had an internal clock that told her when I was busy and tired. She always seemed to arrive just when I was on the edge of frustration. And yet there she was, smiling and walking toward me with that same overzealous friendliness. "Hi there. How's everything going?" she asked as she approached, holding up a clipboard as though she was about to take notes on something. Her smile was as wide as ever, but it seemed like there was an edge to it this time, like she was almost too eager to see me. "Everything's fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't in the mood for any more small talk. I was deep into a project, and the last thing I wanted was for her to continue pushing me to join the HOA. "I see you're working hard out here. You know, the HOA has a great lawn care program," she began, as if the words were scripted. "We offer help with everything from irrigation to maintenance. You might not realize it, but some of the neighboring properties could benefit from a little upkeep. It wouldn't hurt to be part of the group." I could feel the irritation starting to rise. It was the same pitch as before, only this time it felt more intrusive. "I really don't need help with anything," I said, trying to sound calm. "I've got things under control." Linda didn't seem deterred at all. In fact, her smile widened even more, if that was possible. "Well, I just wanted to offer. You know, a cohesive neighborhood is good for everyone. We all work together to make things look nice. It's about creating a community, and being a part of the HOA can really help you with that." I shook my head, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice this time. "I don't want to be part of any community group. I moved out here to avoid that sort of thing. I'm not interested." Linda paused, as if considering my words. Then, in a voice that was a little too smooth, she said, "I understand. But just so you know, the HOA has a way of helping properties look uniform. We want everyone's place to look great, and it's easier to do that when everyone is on the same page. There's a certain standard we all aim for, you know." Her tone was almost like a gentle warning, as if I didn't fully understand the unspoken rules of country living. I was starting to feel like I was being backed into a corner, and that made my decision clear. I needed to set boundaries. "Linda," I said, my voice firm, "I'm not interested in joining your HOA, and I don't want any more visits from you. I appreciate your concern, but I've made my choice. Please respect that." She stood there for a moment, blinking as though she hadn't expected such a direct response. Then, she smiled again. This time, it seemed more like a thinly veiled smile of understanding. "Of course, I respect that. I just thought I'd offer. But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." With that, she turned and left, walking back to her car. I watched her go, still feeling uneasy. It was the third time she had visited, and each time, she seemed more persistent. It wasn't just casual neighborly interest anymore. It felt like pressure, like she was trying to wear me down. I tried to focus on the work at hand, but Linda's visits were starting to leave a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't that I minded people being friendly. I had grown up with that kind of neighborly spirit on the farm. But there was something about the way Linda operated that didn't sit right with me. She was pushy, and her persistence bordered on intrusive. It wasn't the kind of interaction I had in mind when I moved to the farm. A few days passed in relative peace, and I thought maybe Linda had finally taken the hint. I went about my usual routine of working on the land, fixing up the house, and spending time outdoors. But as with everything else, peace never seemed to last. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch enjoying a rare moment of quiet, I saw a couple of cars parked by the edge of the property. At first, I thought they were just lost, but as I got closer, I saw that they were people I didn't recognize. Two men and a woman, all walking slowly along the edge of the property, looking at the land as if they were assessing it. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a random incident. They were on my land, and I had no idea who they were. I walked over to them, trying to keep my cool. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sharp. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up and smiled, clearly not bothered by the fact that she was trespassing. "Oh, hi. We're just checking out the land. Linda said it was okay to walk around here." I blinked in disbelief. "What? No, this land is private property. It's not open to the public." The man who was with her seemed a little flustered. "Oh, sorry, we didn't mean to intrude. Linda just mentioned that this area could be enjoyed by the community." I felt my blood start to boil. Linda again. I was done being polite. No one, including Linda, has permission to give anyone access to this property. I said, my voice low but firm. "This land is mine. It's not part of your HOA, and it's not open for anyone to wander around in. Got it?" The woman nodded, her expression apologetic, but I could tell she wasn't taking me seriously. She quickly muttered an apology and ushered the others back to their cars. But the whole interaction left me shaken. It was clear Linda had told them this land was open for anyone to use, and that kind of overstep was something I couldn't ignore. I immediately went inside and grabbed my phone, calling Linda. I wasn't going to let this slide. She picked up on the second ring, her voice cheerful as always. "Hey there. I hope everything's going well for you." "Linda," I said, my tone serious, "I just caught a group of people walking on my land. They said you told them it was okay to be here. I'm not happy about this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, well, I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice too calm for my liking. "I might have mentioned the property, but I didn't mean for anyone to actually trespass. If it caused any confusion, I'm sorry." I could feel the frustration rising again. "This isn't just a misunderstanding, Linda. You don't get to tell people they can walk around on my property. I'm done being polite. If this continues, I'll be taking further action." There was a brief silence on the line before Linda spoke again. "I understand," she said, her tone now slightly cooler. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But just so you know, the HOA could help with situations like this." "I don't want your HOA, Linda. Please stop trying to involve me." She gave a short, strained laugh. "All right, I'll respect your wishes. But if you ever change your mind..." I ended the call before she could finish. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, tucked between a stack of junk mail and an advertisement for a nearby farm equipment sale. The envelope was official-looking, with the bold letters HOA stamped across the top. My stomach tightened as I recognized the return address. It was Linda's neighborhood. The letter inside was like a slap in the face. It accused me of non-compliance with neighborhood standards, specifically mentioning the condition of my farm and my refusal to join the HOA. It was a list of complaints, vague but accusatory, suggesting that my property was disrupting the cohesiveness of the surrounding area. They cited maintenance issues and claimed that my farm didn't meet community standards. I was furious. My farm was fine. It was my choice how to maintain it, and I wasn't beholden to anyone's standards but my own. The letter seemed like a petty attempt to force me into submission, but it was also a signal that they were trying to escalate things. I'd had enough of this, enough of the subtle threats and the intrusion on my land. I didn't even bother responding immediately. Instead, I focused on the work I had planned for the day, hoping that maybe Linda and her HOA would get the hint. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, Linda showed up again, this time with a clipboard in hand and a determined look on her face. "Hi there," she said, that unnerving smile still plastered on her face. "I've got some great news. The neighborhood is really interested in making sure everyone's property is well maintained, and I've gathered a petition from some of the HOA members. We'd really appreciate it if you'd allow the community to access your land for regular maintenance checks. We want to keep things looking nice and cohesive around here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What are you talking about?" I snapped. I've told you before, I'm not part of the HOA, and I'm not interested in any of your community maintenance programs. Linda's smile didn't falter. Oh, I understand, she said, nodding sympathetically. But it would really help the neighborhood if your property were accessible to the HOA for inspections and upkeep. After all, we all benefit when everything looks coordinated. Don't you think? I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. No, Linda, I don't think that at all. This is my property, and I have every right to keep it private. She didn't seem to hear me. Well, that's what the petition is about. If you just sign here, we can make sure everything stays in line with the neighborhood standards. It's just a small ask. Really? I didn't even look at the clipboard. I'm not signing anything, I said firmly, glaring at her. And I'm not allowing anyone on my property either. Linda paused, a flicker of something like annoyance crossing her face, but it disappeared almost immediately. She straightened up, her expression returning to one of sickly sweetness. Of course, I'll leave this with you, just in case you change your mind. She handed me the clipboard, and I shoved it back into her hands. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. As I stood there, staring after her, my frustration reached new heights. I had made it clear I didn't want any involvement with the HOA, but Linda wasn't just pushing boundaries. She was bulldozing them. It was becoming painfully clear that she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. 2 days after this incident, the sabotage started. I went to check the fences around the property, making sure everything was secure after the previous storm, when I noticed something strange. One of the gates was wide open, and the fence had been damaged, bent in places, almost as though someone had been trying to break through. As I moved along the perimeter, it got worse. In one area, the fence had been completely cut, leaving a gaping hole in the otherwise secure boundary. And to make matters worse, I found a trail of fresh tire tracks leading into the property from the road. I was fuming. This wasn't an accident, this was deliberate. Someone had done this on purpose. As I made my way toward the fields, I found more damage. Crops trampled underfoot, a pile of trash dumped just past the garden. It looked like someone had just tossed their garbage out here, as though it was their personal dumping ground. My hands clenched into fists as I walked back toward the house, trying to think through what I should do next. I checked the mailbox. There it was, another letter from the HOA. This one was even more aggressive than the last, claiming that my fence was violating HOA guidelines and encroaching on their land. It was ridiculous. I knew the boundaries of my farm. I checked them when I bought the property. There was no way my fence was on their land. But their letter suggested otherwise, and they demanded that I rectify the issue immediately. I stared at the letter, feeling my anger boil over. I wasn't going to let Linda and her HOA push me around any longer. I needed proof that the fence was fine, that my property lines were clear. The next morning, I hired a surveyor. The surveyor was professional, efficient, and a lot more thorough than I had expected. He spent the entire day mapping out the property lines, measuring distances, and confirming the boundaries. After he finished, he pulled me aside with the results. The fence, he told me, was perfectly in line with the property's borders. It didn't encroach on anyone's land, but there was something else. He pointed out a patch of landscaping on my land, trees, shrubs, and a small garden. That was clearly part of the HOA's property. The landscaping extended a few feet into my property, just enough to be a concern. It wasn't a huge issue, but it was enough to show that the HOA had been encroaching on my land, just as they had tried to claim I was doing with my fence. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to take action. I sat down and wrote a cease and desist letter, demanding that Linda and the HOA stop their harassment and remove their landscaping from my property. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I sent the letter the next day, hoping it would be the end of things. The last few weeks had felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, and I was waiting for that moment when everything would come to a head. The HOA's persistent harassment, the sabotage, the lies. It all seemed to be building towards something more. I wasn't just dealing with a woman who wanted to expand her little community. Linda was up to something far more sinister, and I was getting closer to finding out exactly what that was. One afternoon, as I was repairing the damage to the fence, again, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, just outside the property, parked on the side of the road, was Linda's car, and right beside it were two other vehicles I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat as I watched Linda step out of her car, flanked by the same two individuals who had trespassed on my land weeks earlier. They were walking across my property, measuring something, taking notes, and speaking in low voices. I grabbed my phone and quietly took a few photos, then switched on the security cameras. I wasn't going to let this slip by without documenting it. As I watched them, I felt the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. They were taking measurements and marking something out. Were they planning something? What had Linda been up to all this time? The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. It wasn't just suspicious, it was wrong. I dug through my records, looking for anything that might explain what Linda had been doing. Then, in the middle of all the chaos, I made the discovery that I knew would change everything. Linda had submitted an annexation request to the local government, claiming that my farm was abandoned. She'd argued that it would be better off as part of the HOA's management and had even gone so far as to suggest that it would benefit the community to reclaim the land. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She'd been setting this up for months, trying to manipulate local officials into giving her control over my property. I knew I had to act, and I had to act fast. With the security footage, the survey results that showed my property boundaries were clear, and all the documentation of the harassment and sabotage, I put everything together. I made copies of the footage, wrote up a timeline of everything that had happened, and included the annexation request as evidence. It was time to take this fight public. I turned to social media first. It wasn't just the HOA I was fighting anymore. It was Linda and her manipulative schemes that I was exposing. I uploaded the security footage, showing Linda and her accomplices on my property, and shared the documents that proved her underhanded dealings. Almost immediately, the post went viral. People I didn't even know started sharing it, commenting, and tagging others. Neighbors who had signed the petition for community access began reaching out to apologize. They had been duped, and now they understood the truth. The community that Linda had tried to manipulate was starting to see her for who she really was. It didn't take long for Linda to realize the firestorm she had sparked. She had miscalculated the trust people had in her. Those who had once looked up to her as the friendly, welcoming face of the HOA were now turning against her, shocked by the lies she had told them. I wasn't the only one fighting for my privacy anymore. People who had been taken in by her smooth talk were now rallying to my side. They hadn't known the full extent of her actions, and once they saw the evidence, they were appalled. But Linda didn't back down. She couldn't. Her pride wouldn't let her. What she didn't count on, though, was that I wasn't done yet. I had more than just public outrage on my side. A few days after the online storm hit, the local authorities contacted me. They had launched an investigation into Linda's actions, and what they uncovered was even worse than I could have imagined. Linda hadn't just lied about the annexation request. She had used HOA funds to further her personal gain, diverting money that was supposed to benefit the community toward her own schemes. The investigation uncovered fraudulent reports, improper use of HOA resources, and a series of other violations that left her no room to wriggle out of the consequences. Linda was arrested for trespassing, misconduct, and financial mismanagement. She was forced to step down as the HOA president, and her actions were scrutinized in a way that left her no chance to regain any credibility. The HOA had no choice but to cut ties with her, and that was the moment everything changed. The investigation into her annexation plot didn't stop with her removal from the HOA. It turned out that part of the landscaping the HOA had placed on my land without my permission was actually a violation of property boundaries. It wasn't just trespassing. It was a blatant encroachment. The survey had shown it, but now the authorities were taking action. The HOA board, under new leadership, agreed to remove the landscaping that had unlawfully been placed on my property. They had no choice. It was the right thing to do, and I made sure to document every step of the process, ensuring that there was no further encroachment. With Linda out of the picture, I finally had the space I had worked so hard to protect. In the weeks that followed, things settled back into a calm routine.